There are moments in life when no one needs to say a word for you to know everything is about to change. For me, that moment wasn't when they slid a pay cut document across the table, nor when I sat in my car trying to breathe like someone who had just plunged underwater. It happened long before any of that, on a morning when I walked into Lumen Vista and saw the bright, steady fire in Noah Patel's eyes as he told me we were going to build something worthy. I believed him more than I had ever believed anything in my life. I am Maya Sullivan, 37 years old, 10 years tied to a company I once thought I would grow old with. I worked in customer behavior analytics, a field I never imagined I would love until I realized the thing I was truly good at was understanding people. And in those 10 years, I understood plenty of them, demanding clients, hot-headed engineers, shaky seed stage startups, and large enterprises that always wanted more than their contracts ever promised. I joined when Lumen Vista had 15 people and rented a half floor in an old brick building facing a street crowded with delivery trucks. Back then, we lived on weak coffee and brainstorms that stretched past 2 in the morning. Some nights, I slept on the office chair beside my desk, wrapped in Noah's hoodie because the air conditioning loved to fail at the worst times. At that point, Emma, my daughter, was 4 years old. On nights when I could not find childcare, I brought her with me. She would sit in the corner with a box of crayons while I tried to close the contracts that would keep the company alive. I do not know if she remembers those nights, but I do. She would look at me and say I was doing something important. I believed her, and I believed in myself. Noah taught me that. He did not have the glossy charisma founders usually save for magazine covers, but he had a strange, unwavering faith in people. Once, during a brutal quarter, I asked him how he kept the team going when everything felt stacked against us. He just smiled and said, word for word, Lumen Vista will never be stronger than the last person to leave this office each day. Treat them right. I carried that line for a decade. I believed my value was seen here, and in a way, I thought I had left a mark. I built a relationship with Westbridge Retail so solid that their chief technology officer called me before calling support. I helped Halcyon Freight System through a deployment failure that should have ended their contract for good. I knew Mark's son's birthday. I knew the chief executive officer of Westbridge hated flying at night. I knew who needed reassurance at 3 in the morning. None of it appeared in my job description, but if I did not do it, the company would lose millions. This job was not just a job. It was how I raised my child, how I paid for Emma's asthma medication, how I stayed upright after my marriage collapsed and her father walked out to find himself with a yoga instructor in Santa Cruz. Every time Emma struggled to breathe, I reminded myself that failure was not an option for me. And there was someone else who reminded me, though in his own way, Blake Turner. The day he walked into Lumen Vista, he believed he would be promoted to lead account. Everyone could see it. But after a project, I had to step in and save. Noah promoted me instead. I never intended to block anyone's path, but I understood the look Blake gave me from that day forward. A quiet kind of stare that still managed to chill me down the spine. He never said anything cruel outright, but no one forgot his tone in that meeting when he claimed customer success was the most replaceable department in the building. I laughed then, but deep down I knew it was not a careless remark. For years, I assumed Blake was simply hard on the world. I never imagined a day would come when he would hold something in his hands, one signature that could end my entire career. The morning everything began was, ironically, beautiful. Seattle had that pale kind of sunlight that makes you want to slow down, and Emma hugged me longer than usual before walking into school. I remember thinking that if today stayed peaceful all the way through, that would be enough. I had no idea that peace would last only until the moment I stepped into the office and saw the conference room lamp shining bright, like it was waiting for something worse than I could imagine. And when Rachel sent me a message asking for a quick meeting, something inside me shifted, just slightly off its axis. What I did not know was that in a few minutes, my life would split cleanly into a before and an after. Everything began to shift in the fall of last year when Noah sent a company-wide email at 5 in the morning. The subject line was short. A new chapter begins. I still remember reading it in the kitchen, the light not fully awake yet, Emma eating cereal and asking the kind of question children always pick at the exact moment adults want to avoid it. Mom, are you okay? I told her everything was fine. But the moment I reached the part announcing that Cedargate Global had officially acquired Lumen Vista, I knew the days we once lived, the days that meant something, were already over. The all hands meeting was held the next day. Noah stood on the stage, his shirt wrinkled in that way that told everyone he had been up all night. He spoke about a new vision, broader data access, and how Cedargate would open an era of accelerated growth. But through all 15 minutes of his speech, I could not find the man who once draped his jacket over my shoulders on a winter night when the heater broke. All I saw was someone avoiding the eyes of his own team, as if he did not have the courage to say things would never be the same again. After that meeting, the atmosphere in the office shifted in a way I could not name at first. No more soft jokes in the morning. No more wandering conversations by the coffee counter. Instead, Slack messages whispered between private channels. Who will be kept? Who will be cut? Who does Cedargate favor? Who do they want gone? Every question seemed to orbit a single truth. Who still has value, and how long that value will last? The first changes arrived quietly. I began receiving emails asking for detailed reports, formatted in new templates, filled with metrics that even the system creator could not confirm the meaning of. Then came the endless meetings, where every minor decision needed approval across 5 layers. Cross functional teams that once moved easily together grew rigid, as if everyone had to pass through the same narrow doorway, and no one dared step back. No one said it outright, but I knew they were reshaping Lumen Vista into a smaller version of Cedargate. Week by week, desks began to empty. The floor that had once been loud with conversation now held nothing but the sound of air vents and a few scattered keyboard taps. People who left always said things like they needed rest or new challenges, but everyone knew they had not left by choice. They had been pushed to exhaustion until leaving became the only way to survive. Blake returned on a rainy afternoon with a new title, Integration Lead. He walked into the conference room wearing a smile that was impossible to read, somewhere between polite and cold. I remember feeling a strange wind move through the room, dropping the temperature by a few degrees. His job was to restructure the department to fit corporate strategy. Everyone knew what that meant. During a strategy meeting with Cedargate, I sat in the corner, taking notes and observing. Blake stood and laid out the areas that needed streamlining, and then I heard him say something that sent a chill down the back of my neck. The customer success department is being valued higher than its actual impact. It does not generate direct revenue. Therefore, we need to reassess the investment. I do not remember when my hand tightened around my pen. What I remember is the Cedargate director subtly nodding, as if Blake had simply stated a universal truth no one needed to question. And in that moment, I saw the mindset Noah once fought so hard against quietly becoming the new standard. People are replaceable if the numbers say they are. While all these shifts unfolded, my workload climbed a slope no one wanted to look at. My team was cut from 9 to 4, then to 3. Key accounts, instead of being distributed evenly, were funneled straight to me because Maya has the most experience. I found myself on calls from 8 in the morning until 7 at night, then emailing until midnight. I had worked hard before, but not like this. This was the kind of work that follows you into your sleep and wakes up with you in the morning. Emma started asking why I could not make it to her music performance, why I shot out of bed at 5 to answer an email that could wait until 8, why I call on video from the office more often than from home. I kept trying to smile. I kept saying we just need to get through this phase. But Emma was only 11. She did not understand that sometimes when adults say getting through this phase, what they really mean is, I do not know when this ends. The signs of burnout showed up the way they always do, predictable but still hard to accept. My eyes stung from staring at the screen. My hands trembled slightly on the drive home. I forgot lunch, forgot reports, forgot I had promised Emma we would watch a movie together that night. I kept telling myself it was only stress, that things would settle again. But deep down, I knew I was going past a limit I no longer had the strength to return from. And in the middle of all that chaos, something unspoken began to settle over everything. A quiet realization that the Lumen Vista I once knew was gone. No one wanted to be the first to say it, but we all felt it. That morning began like any other, if not slightly worse. I arrived a few minutes late because Emma had a stuffy nose, and it took nearly 10 minutes to find her spare inhaler. When I set my bag on the desk, my inbox was already blinking with dozens of unread messages. But the first thing my eyes landed on was not a client email. It was a short subject line from Rachel. Quick 15-minute catch up. I had learned that in a post merger environment, no quick catch up was ever truly quick, and almost none of them brought good news. Still, I hoped, the way someone walking into a courtroom still hopes the judge might be kinder today than usual. I closed my laptop, drew in a long breath, and walked toward the small meeting room at the end of the hallway. The moment the door opened, I saw them already seated. Rachel in her familiar spot, trying to hold a polite smile. And Blake, leaning back slightly, his hands interlaced, his expression calm in a way that bordered on unnerving. He looked at me as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, as if a script had been written and I had just stepped into my assigned role. Maya, thank you for coming, Rachel said. Her tone tried to stay light, as if this were nothing more than an end-of-quarter update. But my throat tightened. Something in that room, in the way Blake did not bother to greet me, made the hairs on my arms rise. I had been in enough tense meetings to know when one of them would change everything. Blake spoke first. We have reviewed the organizational structure, starting with the roles that have the greatest impact on the market. I heard the phrase greater impact and, for a fraction of a second, allowed myself to imagine this might be an opportunity. Maybe a move into a more strategic role, maybe something good. People fool themselves like that sometimes, right before they are struck down. Rachel placed a sheet of paper on the table and nudged it toward me. I looked at the first number, then looked again because my brain refused to process it. The new salary, reduced by 60%, effective immediately. I felt the room shrink around me. The hum of the air conditioner, the ticking clock, the cars outside, all of it tightening into a single point of pressure. I do not know how long I sat there. I only remember Rachel saying something about restructuring, market alignment, and resource focus. Words mixed into a formula people use when they want to kill a career but keep their tone gentle. Blake leaned forward. The market does not pay that level for your role anymore, Maya. He said it like someone reading a neutral statement out of an economics textbook, not like he was talking about 10 years of my life. Then he kept going, listing a few small mistakes I had long forgotten. An email was sent 1 minute late, a delayed response to Halcyon during a week when I had taken Emma to a medical appointment. He gathered all of it and shaped it into proof that I no longer fit, that my value had dropped along some invisible chart only he could see. And the part that cut the deepest was not the words themselves. It was his eyes, the eyes of someone who had finally gotten what he had been wanting for a long time. I felt my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. Part of me wanted to shout, to ask whether they had any idea what I had done to keep this company standing. But the other part, the one shaped by Noah's lessons about staying calm in a storm, kept me still. I simply said, my voice steady enough to surprise even myself, I need 24 hours to review this. Rachel nodded too quickly, relieved I was not causing a scene. Blake said nothing, only leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, as if everything had gone exactly according to plan. I do not remember how I left the meeting room. I do not remember whether I said goodbye. I only remember Emma's face flashing through my mind as I walked down the hall, and the slight tremor in my hand as I pressed the elevator button. I knew I could not break down here, not in front of them. The parking lot felt like a private sky I had never realized I needed. I sat in my car for nearly 5 minutes just to breathe. Then the truth began to crash over me like waves. I was losing more than half my income, immediately. No negotiation, no warning. And they said it as if I should thank them for keeping me at all. I opened the glove compartment to look for a tissue, and there it was. The drawing Emma made for me on the first day of the school year. A crooked line of color and the words written in her shaky handwriting. Mom, you are my hero. I stared at it, and something inside me cracked, in a way no meeting and no number ever could. My eyes blurred, my throat tightened, and I could not hold myself together any longer. I cried. Not the silent kind held behind clenched teeth, but the kind that breaks open everything you have been burying for months. I cried for the sleepless nights, for the mornings Emma had to make her own breakfast, for every moment I missed because a client could not find the logout button. I cried because some part of me had known all along that this company no longer saw me as a human being, only as a line item on a balance sheet. And through the blur of tears, I finally saw the hardest truth. I had traded away too much of my time for a place that no longer deserved it, a place that had forgotten who I was. That night, I did not go home right away. I drove to the parking lot behind the city library, the kind of place where no one pays attention to anyone, and the yellow lights stayed dim enough for you to feel like you could disappear into the air. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat, my hands still trembling slightly after crying in the car. I knew I should rest, should go home to Emma, should find something to hold myself steady. But inside me, one single question kept repeating. What gives them the right to do this to me? I pulled up the old employment contract I had signed nearly a decade earlier. Those pages were once a point of pride. I remember the day Noah handed them to me. He said we were building a core team, that people like me would be the irreplaceable heart of the company. Now, looking at it again, every clause felt like proof of the innocence I did not know I had back then. I read every line again and again. No, non-compete. A salary reduction clause requiring advance notice. A transition requirement for any change in compensation. All of it was there, written as if it had been designed to protect me in the future. Yet Cedargate had torn through every bit of it with a single sheet of paper and three gentle sentences about the market. A slow, heavy despair spread through me, the kind that feels like a wound without blood, sharp enough to keep you still. My phone buzzed, a LinkedIn notification. I almost ignored it, my mind too worn to hold even one more thing, but the name stopped me. Lena Ortiz. Lena and I had worked together in the early years of Lumen Vista. She was sharp, funny, ambitious, the kind of person who could close a deal in 3 sentences. 6 months earlier, she had left for Orion Metrics. Once Cedargate arrived, that decision looked like perfect survival instinct. Her message held only 2 sentences. Maya, are you free to talk? And have you checked your LinkedIn lately? I wrote back that I could talk right then if she was available. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Her voice came through, edged with worry. Maya, I have been trying to reach you for days. Elliot asked about you at least 3 times last week. You have not checked LinkedIn at all. I let out a dry laugh. I could not remember the last time I had slept for even 4 hours. I had opened nothing but emails and client documents. Lena exhaled. Elliot Kane wants to meet you. Not a casual meeting, not exploratory. He has been watching your work for a long time. He even said outright that if he ever had the chance, he would bring you over no matter the cost. I went silent. The sentence echoed in my mind like a door swinging open. Elliot Kane was the chief executive of Orion Metrics, a man sharp enough to silence a room with a single question. Someone respected by major clients and feared by competitors, and now he wanted to meet me. The next day, I stepped into a small cafe on the west side of the city and chose a table near the window. Then Elliot walked in, a man in his early 40s, tall, with eyes that looked straight through whatever you tried to hide. His handshake was firm, the kind that told you he already knew exactly what was happening to you. Let us speak plainly, Maya. I know Cedargate just cut your salary. My blood seemed to halt for a beat. He continued, his voice steady but full of weight. And I know why they did it. It is not your ability. It is not the market. They are lowering the value of a department before shifting it into their model. And you are the head of that department. I had heard people analyze strategy before, but never someone who could name the truth of my situation in a few sentences. Elliot did not just describe what was happening. He laid out everything I had felt but could not articulate. I told him about the meeting, the salary cut, Blake's eyes, the small mistakes they gathered and used as justification for a decision made long before that day. Elliot did not interrupt. He watched me with the understanding of someone who knew the cruelty of mergers far too well. When I finished, he nodded. That is called value erasure before reassignment. They do it to push you out without paying much. But let me be clear. Nothing in your story shows you deserve to be treated that way. Then he placed a thin folder on the table. This is our offer. Role: Vice President of Customer Impact. Compensation higher than your original salary at Lumen Vista before the cut. Performance bonus tied to retention, stock options, and premium health coverage that includes all of Emma's medication. I could barely breathe. But Elliot was not done. We are opening a new service branch focused on system transformation for large enterprises. To do that, we need someone who understands customers well enough to grasp not only their KPIs, but their unspoken fears. Someone who can save a contract in its final minute. Someone chief information officers trust more than their own technical leads. And that is you, Maya. You are not just qualified. You are the person we want to build the entire division around. I looked at Elliot, and for the first time in many months, I felt seen. Truly seen. Not as a cost line to optimize, but as a human being with value that was tangible, specific, and undeniable. While I was still absorbing it, Elliot added one more line, slow and deliberate, as if he wanted it carved into my memory. Someone like you should never be treated as a number in a cost reduction table. Someone like you creates revenue, not expenses. In that moment, I knew my life could turn onto an entirely different path. And for the first time in a very long time, what I felt was not fear. It was something close to hope. That night, after meeting with Elliot, I drove home in a strange state. Not relieved, not exactly excited. It felt more like standing at the door of a room you know will change your life the moment you step inside. I sat in the living room, watching the streetlights spill through the window while hearing Emma laugh in her bedroom at the same cartoon she had watched for the 10th time. I thought about Elliot, about his words, about the salary cut paper on Rachel's desk, all of it pulled together into a tight line that held both danger and possibility. Lena called me around 9 in the evening, ready for the next part. She said it like we were playing some strategic game and we were about to win. She told me Orion's legal team had reviewed my old contract and wanted me on a Zoom call the next morning. I agreed, even though a small part of me still felt guilty, the kind of guilt loyal people carry even when they are the ones betrayed. The following morning, I sat before my screen as the Zoom window lit up with three faces: Lena, a young attorney named Marcy, and Orion's senior counsel, Mr. Harding, a man whose voice made anyone sit a little straighter. We reviewed your contract carefully, Mr. Harding began. And Maya, let me be very clear. Cedargate has put itself in a difficult position and given you leverage. I leaned in slightly. Those were not words you heard every day. He lifted a packet of documents. There are three key points. First, there is no non-compete clause. That means you can join Orion entirely within the law. No one can prohibit you from doing so because your old company failed to protect that right from the start. I knew that, but hearing someone else say it, especially an attorney, made it feel real. Part of me felt relief, another part felt anger. How could a company dismantle someone's life so easily, yet be careless about its own protections? Second point, he continued, is the salary reduction clause. If compensation is decreased by more than 20% without advance notice, you may leave immediately and have no obligation to complete the client handoff. They cut your pay by 60%, far beyond the limit. I froze for a moment. I remembered that clause more clearly than I wanted to admit. I was the one who had advocated for it years earlier after a former colleague was forced to work nearly 2 weeks unpaid to hand off clients before being terminated. I had told Noah the company needed to treat people humanely in difficult situations, and Noah, back when he was still the old Noah, had agreed. A sharp bitterness rose inside me. The thing I created to protect others was now protecting me, from the very company I had once protected with everything I had. Mr. Harding continued. Third point, the notice period. The contract states that the notice period must match the company's standard severance. Do you know how much severance they offered historically? I nodded. 1 week. Never more. Correct. That means your notice requirement is 1 week, and we will ensure Cedargate cannot force you to stay longer or require you to transfer any system or client knowledge that does not legally belong to them. Lena smiled, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of someone who had waited for this moment. Maya, they did not just treat you poorly, they were careless. And carelessness in this world is fatal. Something unfamiliar stirred in me. Not vindication, not revenge, but clarity. For the first time in many months, I could see my path. I was no longer wandering in the dark. I had rights. I had options. I had a way out that Cedargate could not close. Marcy added gently but firmly, the important thing is that you do not react impulsively. We do this correctly, thoroughly, leaving them no opening to strike back in any legal form. You leave with dignity and within the law. I nodded, feeling something like my first deep breath in months. I thought about Rachel, about Blake, about the salary cut paper pushed toward me like a verdict. I thought about the nights Emma slept while I crafted emails until 3 in the morning, convincing myself the sacrifice would someday be worth it. Now I knew. Most of that sacrifice had fallen into a bottomless hole, but that did not make my effort meaningless. It simply meant it was time to place it somewhere that deserved it. After the meeting, I sat alone in my small home office. The light from the window cast a faint reflection of my face on the black screen. I saw myself, exhausted, hurt, but not broken. I had let Cedargate dictate too much of my life for too long. Not anymore. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper, not to write a resignation on the spot, but to craft an exit plan. No noise, no slamming doors. A precise, clean departure, leaving no weakness for them to grasp. I did not want to leave in anger. I wanted to leave with accuracy. I wanted to leave as someone who knows exactly what she is worth. And as I wrote the first line, I realized something undeniable. The game no longer belonged to Cedargate. It belonged to me. The morning I walked into Cedargate's office, no one knew it would be the last day I ever entered that building as their employee. I knew. And in some quiet way, my body knew too. Every movement felt slower, precise, and deliberate. I no longer carried the despair or fear of the past weeks. I no longer needed to steady myself. What I carried now was clarity. I opened the meeting room door exactly at 8. Rachel was already seated, her hands pressed together as if she were holding herself in place. Blake stood by the window, hands in his pockets, facing the city like a man admiring a view, but really savoring the victory he believed was moments away. When I stepped inside, Blake turned. A small smile flickered on his lips. It was not really a smile, it was confirmation. He believed he controlled the entire room. "We are glad you came, Maya," Blake said, his tone light, as if this were a routine update. "We need your answer so we can proceed with the next steps of restructuring." I pulled out a chair and sat, calm, no bowed head, no trembling, none of the fear he had grown accustomed to seeing. What surprised me was how easily the calm settled in. It arrived naturally, as if I had been preparing for this moment longer than Blake had. "Before I make a decision, I want to ask about 3 accounts," I said. "Westbridge, Halcyon, Redwood." Rachel glanced at Blake. Blake lifted his brows slightly, the gesture saying, "This does not matter." "Those accounts will be reassigned as needed," Blake replied. "That is no longer your concern, no longer my concern." For 10 years, I had held those accounts together. I knew every staffing shift they made, every change in investment strategy, every tiny technical issue support teams never caught. I looked directly at Blake. "Who is leading Westbridge when their new system rollout begins in 8 weeks?" Blake tightened his lips. No answer. "And Halcyon," I continued. "I know they have a risk assessment scheduled next week. Who will lead that call?" Blake dropped his eyes as if searching for notes, but really avoiding mine. I leaned forward slightly. "And Redwood. Their renewal is next month. They specifically requested my presence in their executive meeting." Rachel sat frozen. Blake shifted from confident to visibly irritated. "Those matters will be handled internally," he said, voice thinning. "You do not need the details anymore." I nodded softly. I had confirmed what I suspected. They had no replacement, no plan beyond shoving those enterprise clients toward offshore teams. They had intended to move everything to Manila and hoped I would serve as a temporary bridge, shielding them from the fallout before being quietly pushed out. I opened my bag and pulled out a stack of papers. My employment contract. The original. Rachel's face went pale. Blake smirked, amused, as if I were staging theatrics. I set the contract on the table, tapping it lightly with my finger. "This is the contract I signed with Lumen Vista, still valid since Cedargate never issued new agreements for legacy employees." Blake shrugged. "And your point?" "Many things," I thought, but I only spoke the essentials. "There are 3 key clauses in this contract. First, there is no non-compete. which means I am free to work wherever I choose, including with your direct competitors. Blake clenched his jaw. Rachel looked down. Second, if my salary is reduced by more than 20% without notice, I am under no obligation to transfer client knowledge. You reduce mine by 60%. Effective immediately. I owe you nothing. Rachel swallowed. Blake leaned forward, his eyes sharpening. And third, I continued, the notice period must match the severance historically granted. Lumen Vista never granted more than 1 week. Therefore, my notice is 1 week. Blake slammed his hand on the table. You think you can wave an old contract at us? I have access to your emails and personal files on our system. If I find anything inappropriate, any data that does not belong to you, we will sue. You will never find work again. That was the moment I realized the man in front of me was done pretending. Blake no longer hid anything. He wanted me afraid, small, broken, back in the place he believed I belonged. I met his eyes directly. No retreat, no softening. You think I do not understand this contract, Blake? I am the one who wrote this section. I proposed the salary reduction and handoff protections after an employee was forced to work unpaid. I understand every line more clearly than you ever will. Rachel's eyes widened. Blake froze, disbelief cutting through his expression like someone had shattered a story he had told himself for years. I stood. My voice was steady, almost quiet. I am resigning, effective immediately. Silence. Only the hum of the air conditioner amplified the truth that had just filled the room. I slipped the contract back into my bag and walked toward the door. I had barely taken a few steps when my phone began vibrating nonstop. Rachel stared at her laptop, face tightening. Blake shot upright. He just sent an internal email, Rachel whispered. About me. Rachel nodded. Her voice fell to a thin line. He claims you abandoned your role, refused handoff, and showed signs of transferring client data. In that moment, I understood the battle was not over. Blake could not stomach that I left on my terms, unbroken. So he built a story of his own. But I was not afraid anymore. I opened the door, stepped out of the meeting room, and knew the real storm had only just begun. When I stepped out of the meeting room, the air in the hallway felt thicker, as if every molecule were watching me. I knew this was the turning point. I had just placed the final period on 10 years of my life, not through defeat, but through choice. My phone kept vibrating in my pocket as I walked toward the small workspace Cedar Gate had pushed me into after the takeover. I closed the door, leaned back in the chair, and breathed. Today, there were 3 people I needed to call, and I knew each call would slice through the illusion of power. Cedar Gate thought it still held. The first call was to Elliot Kane. He answered almost instantly, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through every layer I tried to hide behind. Maya, I said, I have officially resigned. There was a silence, but not the awkward kind. It was an acknowledgement. Elliot said, Good, but I need to know how you are. I told him everything, the meeting, the paper, the internal smear email. Blake sent minutes after I walked out. Elliot was neither shocked nor riled. He dissected the situation piece by piece like a surgeon reading a scan. This is their tactic: noise and intimidation until you drown in fear. Do not let them. Our legal team will send a notice today. Then he finished with a voice that felt like a vow. Maya, you are not coming to Orion because you need us. You are coming because we need you. I could not speak for a moment, but I knew, for the first time in years, I had a place that did not treat me like a number. We set a meeting for Monday. The second call was to Noah Patel. He answered with the sound of wind and ocean behind him, the place he always retreated to when he needed to think. His voice shook slightly when I said, I resigned, Noah, and Cedargate is spreading internal accusations. A heavy silence followed. Then he said quietly but firmly, I know. I warned them 3 weeks ago. I straightened. Warned them about what? Noah exhaled, the sound of a man watching the house he built lose brick after brick. I told them your department was not to be touched, not because of emotion, because you hold 3 accounts whose combined revenue could collapse their entire quarter. They ignored me. My chest tightened. They had known the risk yet chose to proceed. I said, I am sorry you had to see this happen. But Noah shook his head. No, Maya, I am the one who owes you an apology. I believed Cedar Gate would keep its word. I was wrong. Then his voice hardened in a way I had never heard. I am calling Gerald, their chief executive, today, not to plead, to tell him that if they continue threatening you, I will testify that the entire thing violates protocol. Something caught in my throat. Noah was not just standing with me. He was standing for the values that once kept Lumen Vista alive. We ended the call, and for the first time, my past did not feel like it had abandoned me. The final call, the most critical, was to Jade Park, Chief Information Officer of Westbridge. She answered almost instantly, her voice quick and sharp as always. Maya, what happened? I spoke plainly. I am no longer at Lumen Vista, effective this morning. Silence. Then Jade burst out, That is impossible. Did they terminate you? No, I resigned. Why? I explained the 60% cut, the restructuring, the pressure tactics, and the fabricated email. But I had barely finished when anger snapped in her tone. Maya, you are the reason we signed with them. Not the technology, not the pricing. You. You understand our system better than our own teams. They removed you without notice, without a transition, without a single briefing. I answered, Nothing at all. Jade nearly shot out of her chair. I will demand an explanation from Cedargate today. They have violated the Enterprise Account Management Clause. And Maya, she paused, her voice steady but weighted. I do not know what you choose next, but any company that gets you is the one that wins. When I hung up, the room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. But it was no longer the heartbeat of someone afraid. It was the heartbeat of someone standing at the edge of a new chapter. In 2 hours, 3 calls, 3 strikes that cracked the power structure Cedargate believed was untouchable. They could smear me. They could threaten lawsuits. They could manipulate internal narratives. But they could not control the one thing I truly owned: the trust of the people I had stood beside, helped, and fought for. A chain reaction had begun, and unlike Cedargate, I did not need to destroy anyone to win. All I needed was to stand with the truth. For the first time in months, I was not running from anything. I was walking toward a future I had chosen. The ripple effects from those 3 calls moved faster than I expected. In less than 24 hours, Cedargate began to feel the first tremors, like the echo of an earthquake they believed would never reach them. I heard from a few former colleagues that their internal Slack had been in chaos all morning. Westbridge demanded an urgent meeting. Halcyon sent a formal inquiry questioning the status of their account. Redwood asked for an explanation of why I had been removed from the project without notice. And in every one of those messages, my name appeared, again and again, a reminder of the value they had failed to see. I was standing in the kitchen preparing breakfast for Emma when my phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. At first, I thought it was spam, but something pushed me to answer. A man's voice came through, clear and cold, like glass, newly wiped clean. Is this Maya Sullivan? Yes, I said. This is Logan Harrington, Chief Executive of Cedargate Global. I froze, my hand still on the refrigerator handle. Logan Harrington was not the type of leader who called mid-level employees. He was the kind who made an entire board straighten their chairs just to avoid irritating him. If he were calling me, Cedargate was truly afraid. I heard you have left the company, Maya, he began. A short pause. I want to say this entire situation is unfortunate and entirely reversible. I did not respond. I let him continue, and he did, as if rehearsed. We are prepared to restore your previous salary, plus an updated bonus structure aligned with current market standards. And I want you to know, I did not know the offshore transition plan. That was not a decision I approved. A strange, quiet humor went through my chest. A billionaire chief executive is trying to save his own chair by sweeping blame off his desk. I expected to feel triumphant, but all I felt was exhaustion. Exhaustion at how people only pay attention to human beings when numbers begin to bleed. You are calling because it is costing you money, I said, my voice low but sharp enough to split the air. There was a pause. Then Logan answered, softer now, but straining to keep control. I want to retain talent in this organization. I shook my head, though he could not see it. No. If Westbridge had stayed quiet, if Halcyon had not emailed, if Noah had not called you, you would not be on this line. I was a cost line to you. And when a cost line walks away on its own, You decide to call it talent. This time, the silence lasted much longer. Then Logan said one short sentence: I will review the entire situation. I did not reply. I ended the call with, I start my new job on Monday. Have a good day. I set the phone down and stood still for a moment, feeling my heartbeat return to its normal rhythm. No trembling, no fear, no hunger for their approval. I had just watched the entire board tilt. Inside Cedargate, things were far less calm than Logan pretended. A former coworker messaged me. Blake had been ordered to produce a full report on every detail of his so-called personnel evaluation. Rachel had been pulled into 3 meetings in one morning. Internal Slack channels leaked whispers that leadership was reconsidering the offshore shift after intense pushback from enterprise clients. And then the thing happened that Cedargate feared most. Clients started emailing me directly at my Orion address. The first message came from Jade. We want to continue working with you. If you are joining Orion, Westbridge would like to discuss collaboration this week. The next was from Halcyon. We heard you left Lumen Vista. We need to revisit our deployment plan. Can we talk today? Then Redwood. If you are with Orion, we are considering changing vendors next quarter. Let us know when you are ready. I read each message slowly, not out of pride, but to remind myself that the years of late-night calls, the last-minute rescues, the endless problem-solving, the care I invested in every account, all of it had been real. My value had never disappeared. Cedargate had only tried to bury it. On Monday, I walked into Orion's office. It was not the pressure-soaked space Cedargate had been, but a bright, steady place where people were actually seen. Elliot shook my hand, and this time his smile was not polite. It was welcoming. We are rebuilding this entire division, he said. Not to compete, to do what Lumen Vista once promised its clients, and you will lead it. I looked around the room, a new team, eager and sharp, ready to build something that mattered. 2 former Lumen Vista employees I had helped escape Cedargate were there too. They smiled at me, like survivors of the same storm. I set my folder on the table. For the first time in months, I felt the ground truly hold my weight. I had not only escaped a toxic place, I was building a better one, a place where people like me did not have to prove their worth by surviving cruelty. As we began our first meeting, I looked through the glass wall at the soft gray of Seattle. The board had fully turned, and this time it was not because I begged or endured. It was because I finally chose to stand with myself. A year passed so quickly that I sometimes had to stop and ask myself how I ever lived under fear for so long. 12 months earlier, I had sat in my car in the Lumen Vista parking lot, crying until I could barely breathe, wondering how my future would collapse. Now, every morning, I woke into a life I had never imagined could exist for me after just 1 year. But perhaps that is what happens when you finally step out of a doorway that had been rotten for far too long. I am the Senior Vice President of Customer Impact at Orion, a new title, but the title itself is not what matters. What matters is that it reflects exactly what I spent a decade building. I lead a team I trust, not because they are forced to stand beside me, but because they believe I will never allow any of them to be treated the way I once was. We have earned 3 industry awards for customer retention and deployment innovation. Orion has become a destination for talent escaping large corporations, people who want to work in a place where they are seen as human beings and not a row in a spreadsheet. My home feels steady again. Emma is a little older now, but she still runs into my arms every time I return from a business trip. She is healthy and happy, and for an entire year, I have not missed a single event in her life. I have been at every important moment: the piano recital, the science fair, the sports ceremony. Once, Emma told me, Mom, you are like my friend's mom now, always on time. She had no idea how close that simple sentence came to making me cry with relief. What makes me smile most is not the title, not the stock, not the salary, but the evenings when we sit down to dinner on time, with no one checking the clock in fear of an urgent email. Emma tells me about her day, and I tell her the good parts of mine. I never knew life could feel this peaceful. But the day that marked the greatest shift in my life was the day I stepped onto the stage at the SaaS Global Summit, the largest event in our industry. I had been invited as the keynote speaker for the session on the future of customer impact. When my name was announced and the lights hit the stage, I walked forward into applause so loud it made me pause for a breath. Not from pride, but from the truth that a year earlier I had believed I would never stand in a place like this. I looked toward the front row of the audience and I saw him. Logan Harrington, Chief Executive of Cedar Gate Global. He sat there with his fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on me. No anger, no resentment. Just the bare truth people sometimes have to face, the realization of their own misjudgment. For one brief moment, I wondered what he was thinking. Regret, confusion. Whether he was asking himself how he had let go of someone who could have helped steady his company when the waters turned rough, or whether he finally understood that cold decisions on paper can destroy things that numbers will never measure. I would never know. And I did not need to know, because that moment did not belong to him. It belonged to me. Before I began my speech, a movement drew every eye in the hall. Jade Park, Chief Information Officer of Westbridge, stepped from the front row onto the stage. No announcement, no theatrics, just a familiar smile, the same one she wore every time we had pulled a doomed project back to life together. Jade shook my hand before thousands of people. Maya, you deserve to stand here more than anyone. The applause rose again. I saw Logan lower his head slightly, not sure whether it was an acknowledgement or avoidance. But it did not matter. What mattered was this. The clients, the people who had always been the heartbeat of my work, stepped onto the stage before the entire industry to declare publicly that my value had never belonged to Cedargate. In that moment, something old closed like a straight, clean line. I began my speech without looking at Logan again. I spoke about the truth that no one in the industry wanted to say aloud. That real innovation lives in how we treat people, not in cost optimization formulas. A relationship built on trust is worth more than any contract signed under pressure, and that sometimes the most important thing a company can do is not stand between its employees and their growth. When I finished, the entire hall stood up. It was not a standing ovation for one person. It was recognition for everyone who had ever been treated like a number, dismissed, undervalued, pulled into a conference room to hear a verdict they did not deserve. In that moment, I saw just how far my life had come. And as I stepped off the stage, Jade leaned in and whispered, Cedargate did not lose you to Orion. They lost you to themselves. That night, when I took Emma out to celebrate, I thought of my story, not as a tragedy, but as an upward arc. True revenge was never about destroying Cedargate. It was not about costing anyone their job, nor proving I was right and they were wrong. The most beautiful revenge was living a life they no longer had the power to touch. I no longer saw myself as a number that could be reduced. I no longer spent nights hoping for recognition from people who never saw my worth. I rebuilt my life on my own terms, and for the first time in years, I felt light, free, and real. I did not destroy Lumen Vista. Lumen Vista destroyed itself when it forgot what Noah once taught. A company is never stronger than the last person who walks out the door each day. And me. I did the only thing that could ever be called revenge. I stood up. I moved on. I became the strongest version of myself. And that was enough.